What if I told you that while Rome was at its height, another superpower, equally wealthy and powerful, existed on the world stage? An empire in the heart of Africa whose colossal monuments still defy explanation and whose disappearance remains one of history's greatest unsolved puzzles. This is the story of the Lost Empire of Aksum. What if I told you that while the Roman Empire dominated the Mediterranean, another superpower, equally wealthy, sophisticated, and powerful, existed on the world stage? An empire in the heart of Africa whose colossal monuments still defy explanation and whose sudden disappearance remains one of history's greatest unsolved puzzles. This is not a myth. This is the story of the Lost Empire of Aksum. In the highlands of modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, silent stone sentinels pierce the sky. They are the great stelae of Aksum, monolithic pillars carved from a single piece of solid granite, the largest weighing over 500 tons. They are taller than any Egyptian obelisk and were erected without the aid of modern technology. Who built these impossible structures? They were the markers of a civilization the Romans called the third most powerful empire in the world, alongside themselves in Persia. The Aksumite Empire was a global trade hub, a nexus connecting the Roman world with the riches of India and the exotic goods of Inner Africa. Their kings were the first in sub-Saharan Africa to mint their own currency in gold, silver, and bronze, stamping their authority on the world stage. They commanded powerful armies and a formidable navy that projected their power across the Red Sea and deep into the Arabian Peninsula. They were pioneers, adopting Christianity as their state religion even before many parts of Europe, creating a unique spiritual tradition that endures to this day. For nearly 1,000 years, Aksum was a beacon of power, wealth, and culture. And then it vanished. Its great cities crumbled, its trade routes dried up, and its name was all but erased from the history books. How could a civilization this advanced, this powerful, simply disappear? Was it a victim of climate change, foreign invasion, a mysterious warrior queen who burned their churches and libraries to the ground? The search for answers takes us deep into a forgotten chapter of human history, a story of ambition, faith, and collapse that holds startling lessons for our own time. We will investigate the unexplained archaeological discoveries that are rewriting what we know about ancient Africa. We will explore the rise of this forgotten superpower, walk through the ruins of its magnificent cities, and analyze the complex web of factors that led to its downfall. This is more than just a history lesson. It's an investigation into one of history's greatest unsolved puzzles. This is the complete story of the Lost Empire of Aksum. Our journey begins not in a grand palace, but in the soil, with the very foundations of Aksumite power. The story of Aksum is inextricably linked to the land from which it sprang. The Ethiopian highlands, a rugged, mountainous plateau, provided a natural fortress. Its fertile soil, watered by monsoon rains, allowed for a unique and resilient form of agriculture, supporting a large and growing population. But Aksum's true genius lay in its location. It was perfectly positioned to dominate the crossroads of the ancient world. To the west lay the Nile Valley, the breadbasket of Egypt, and a corridor into the heart of Africa. To the east, the Red Sea, the great maritime highway that linked the Mediterranean world with the silks of China, the spices of India, and the incense of Arabia. The rulers of Aksum understood this geography better than anyone. They seized control of the key port of Adulis on the coast, turning it into one of the most cosmopolitan and wealthy cities of the ancient world. A Greek-Egyptian merchant who visited Adulis around the 1st century CE wrote a guide for sailors called the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. He describes Adulis as a bustling port where ships from Egypt and India docked side by side. He lists the goods flowing out of Aksum: immense quantities of ivory, rhinoceros horns, hippopotamus hides, tortoise shells, and gold. In return, the Aksumites imported textiles, glass, tools, and wine from the Roman Empire. This trade was the engine of Aksum's wealth, flooding its coffers with gold and silver and allowing its kings to fund monumental building projects and powerful armies. But Aksum was not merely a passive middleman. It was a producer, a conqueror, and an innovator. The empire controlled vast territories rich in gold and salt, two of the most valuable commodities of the ancient world. Their influence stretched from the plains of Sudan in the west to the mountains of Yemen in the east. They were a military force to be reckoned with, a fact that their powerful neighbors knew all too well. The story of Aksum's rise is a testament to the vision of its early leaders, who harnessed the unique advantages of their homeland to build a truly global power. But before Aksum became an empire, before the great stelae were raised, the seeds of this great civilization were sown by even older cultures, whose mysterious legacy can still be found scattered across the Ethiopian highlands. To understand Aksum, we must first travel further back in time, to the enigmatic kingdom that came before. Long before the name Aksum echoed in the halls of Roman power, the Ethiopian highlands were home to a sophisticated civilization known as Dimpt. Flourishing around the 7th to 5th centuries BCE, Dimpt remains one of the most mysterious and least understood kingdoms of ancient Africa. Our knowledge of them comes from tantalizingly few inscriptions and the ruins of their temples and settlements, most notably at Yeha, where a remarkable stone temple still stands today. The temple at Yeha is a masterpiece of ancient engineering. Its walls are constructed from massive, perfectly fitted limestone blocks without the use of mortar, a testament to the incredible skill of its builders. For many years, historians believed that the Dimpt civilization, with its advanced architecture and writing system, was founded by migrants from the kingdom of Saba, or Sheba, in modern-day Yemen. This theory, known as the Sabaean influence hypothesis, suggested that colonists crossed the Red Sea, bringing their culture and technology with them. It was a convenient explanation, one that attributed the rise of civilization in Africa to outside influence. However, modern archaeology is telling a very different and far more compelling story. While there was undoubtedly contact and trade between Dimpt and Saba, they were, after all, neighbors separated by a narrow strait of water. The evidence now overwhelmingly points to Dimpt being an indigenous African civilization. The script used by Dimpt, while sharing a common ancestry with Sabaean, has unique local characteristics. Their religious practices, while showing some South Arabian influences, were centered on indigenous deities. The agricultural practices that formed the backbone of their society were rooted in millennia of local development. This was not a colony. This was a homegrown African power, trading and interacting with its neighbors on its own terms. The Dimpt kingdom eventually faded from the historical record, its decline as mysterious as its rise. But it did not disappear. It laid the cultural, technological, and political groundwork for what was to come. Out of the remnants of Dimpt and other local Proto-Aksumite cultures, a new power began to coalesce around the 1st century CE. This was the birth of Aksum. The early Aksumite kingdom was likely a confederation of smaller chiefdoms, gradually brought under the control of a single ruler in the town that would give the empire its name, Aksum. These early kings were ambitious. They understood that to build an empire, they needed to control the flow of wealth. They expanded from their highland core, pushing down to the Red Sea coast to seize the port of Adulis and wrest control of the lucrative trade routes from their rivals. They also pushed west towards the Nile to control the sources of gold and other African resources. This period of rapid expansion was brutal and transformative. Inscriptions left by these early kings boast of their conquests, listing the peoples they subjugated and the tribute they exacted. They were building their empire with iron and fire, but they were also building it with ideas. The early Aksumites were cultural sponges, absorbing influences from the diverse world they were now connected to. Their art and architecture blended local traditions with Greek, Roman, and South Arabian styles. Their rulers, even while worshiping their own pantheon of gods, understood the importance of communicating with the wider world. They began to use Greek in their inscriptions and on their coins, the international language of trade and diplomacy at the time.
This was a clear statement of their ambition. They were not just a regional power. They saw themselves as players on the global stage. The culmination of this early period of formation can be seen in the very symbols of Aksumite power, the great stelae. These were not temples or palaces, they were funerary monuments, markers for the tombs of the elite and the royal family. The largest of these, the Great Stele, which now lies broken on the ground, stood over 33 meters high and weighed an estimated 520 tons. It remains the largest single piece of stone ever quarried and erected by humanity in the ancient world. Think about that. A civilization in Africa 2,000 years ago achieved a feat of engineering that surpassed even the Egyptians and the Romans. The stelae were designed to look like multi-storied buildings, complete with fake doors and windows carved into the stone. They were symbolic representations of the power and permanence of the Aksumite state, skyscrapers of the ancient world designed to awe and intimidate. Quarrying these massive blocks of granite from a site several kilometers away, transporting them over difficult terrain, and then erecting them with precision required an incredible degree of social organization, mathematical knowledge, and engineering prowess. It speaks of a powerful, centralized state capable of mobilizing vast amounts of labor and resources. It speaks of a society with a deep understanding of physics and mechanics. And it speaks of a culture with a profound belief in its own destiny. These stone giants are the most dramatic evidence of Aksum's arrival as a major power. They are a declaration in granite and ambition, signaling the end of their formative years and the dawn of their golden age. The foundations laid by the Dempt and consolidated by the early warrior kings had created a launching pad for an empire that would soon take its place among the giants of the ancient world, an African superpower ready to challenge the old order. The stage was set for Aksum to truly flourish, to become a hub of wealth, innovation, and faith that would leave an indelible mark on world history. By the 3rd century CE, the Aksumite Empire had entered its golden age. It was a period of unprecedented wealth, military might, and cultural achievement that would last for over 400 years. At the heart of this success was Aksum's mastery of international trade. The empire had become the indispensable bridge between the Roman Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. Every Roman aristocrat who wore silk, every priest who burned incense, every wealthy citizen who adorned their home with ivory was contributing to the immense wealth of the Lost Empire of Aksum. Let's follow the journey of a single piece of ivory, a key Aksumite export. The journey begins deep in the African interior, in the lands beyond Aksum's southern border, what is now modern-day Sudan and South Sudan. Aksumite traders or their intermediaries would venture into these regions, bartering for raw elephant tusks. These tusks were then transported north on arduous overland routes to the capital city, Aksum. In the capital, skilled artisans would work the ivory, carving it into intricate statues, decorative plaques, and furniture inlays. From Aksum, the finished products, along with other goods like gold, obsidian, and aromatic resins like frankincense and myrrh, were loaded onto caravans for the journey to the coast. The destination was the great port of Adulis. Adulis was a vibrant, multicultural metropolis. Its streets would have been a cacophony of languages: Ge'ez, the language of the Aksumites; Greek, the language of the merchants, and the tongues of traders from India, Persia, and Arabia. Here, the ivory would be sold to Roman merchants who had sailed down the Red Sea. In exchange, the Aksumites received Roman currency, fine textiles, blown glass, metal tools, olive oil, and wine. The Roman goods would then travel back up to the highlands to be enjoyed by the Aksumite elite, while the ivory began its long sea voyage to the port of Alexandria in Egypt, and from there to the workshops and villas of Rome itself. This complex network of trade was the lifeblood of the empire, and the Aksumite kings were its shrewd managers. They protected the trade routes, built infrastructure like roads and ports, and, most importantly, they guaranteed the value of the transactions through a revolutionary innovation, their own currency. Around 270 CE, under a king named Endubis, Aksum became the first state in sub-Saharan Africa to mint its own coins. This was a monumental step. Coinage is not just about money, it's about sovereignty, propaganda, and economic control. The earliest Aksumite coins were struck in gold, silver, and bronze, and they were remarkable for their quality and design. One side typically featured a portrait of the king, crowned and holding a spear or staff, a clear image of royal power. The other side often depicted ears of barley or wheat, symbolizing the agricultural wealth and fertility of the kingdom. Crucially, the inscriptions on these early coins were in Greek. This was a deliberate choice. By using the international language of commerce, the Aksumite kings were ensuring their currency would be accepted and trusted by merchants from across the Roman world. They were integrating their economy directly into the global system. The coins were also a powerful tool of propaganda. Each new king would issue coins with his own image, spreading his fame and authority with every transaction. When a Roman merchant in Alexandria used an Aksumite gold coin, he was holding in his hand a message from a powerful African king, a tangible symbol of a distant but formidable empire. The sheer volume and quality of Aksumite coinage attest to the empire's staggering wealth. They had access to so much gold that they could afford to mint high-purity gold coins for international trade, while using silver and bronze for local circulation. This economic power fueled Aksum's military expansion and its ambitious building projects. The capital city, Aksum, grew into a major urban center. While many of its buildings were constructed from wood and mud brick and have since disappeared, the foundations of grand palaces and elite villas have been unearthed by archaeologists. The most famous of these is the structure known as Dungar, often called the Palace of the Queen of Sheba, although it dates to a much later period. This massive complex contained over 50 rooms, including a throne room, residential quarters, kitchens, and courtyards. It was a statement of royal power, designed to impress visitors and administer a sprawling empire. But the true symbols of the Golden Age remained the stelae. The tradition of erecting these giant monoliths continued, with each new monument seemingly trying to outdo the last. They were the ultimate expression of the wealth and confidence of the Aksumite elite. This was a civilization at the peak of its power. It controlled a vast and diverse territory. Its armies were feared, its merchants were respected, and its coffers were overflowing with the profits of global trade. The Persian prophet Mani, writing in the 3rd century, named Aksum as one of the 4 great kingdoms of the world, alongside Rome, Persia, and China. This was not an exaggeration. From their highland capital, the kings of Aksum looked out upon a world they had helped to shape, a world that depended on the goods that flowed through their empire. They were a true African superpower, confident in their strength and secure in their place in the world. But a profound change was on the horizon, a change that would not come from the sword or the marketplace, but from the realm of faith. This transformation would redefine the empire's identity and set it on a new course, one that would bring it into even closer contact and potential conflict with its great rival to the north, the Roman Empire. In the complex geopolitical landscape of the ancient world, 3 great powers dominated the stage: Rome in the west, Sasanian Persia in the east, and between them, controlling the vital arteries of trade, the Aksumite Empire. The relationship between these titans was a delicate dance of diplomacy, trade, and occasional conflict, a high-stakes game for global influence. The relationship between Aksum and Rome was by far the most significant. For centuries, they were not primarily rivals, but partners. They were the 2 most important players in the lucrative Red Sea trade route. Roman ships needed safe passage and access to Aksumite ports, and Aksum needed access to the vast Roman market. This mutual economic dependence fostered a generally peaceful and prosperous relationship.
Roman emperors sent embassies to the court of Aksum, and Aksumite kings sent their own envoys to Rome. They were recognized equals. This relationship is vividly illustrated by the presence of Aksumite merchants and diplomats in Roman cities like Alexandria and even Rome itself. They were a familiar, if exotic, presence in the commercial hubs of the Mediterranean. Likewise, Greek-speaking merchants from the Roman Empire were a common sight in the port of Adulis. This constant interaction led to a significant cultural exchange. Greek became a language of the Aksumite court, used in official inscriptions and on coinage. Roman architectural styles may have influenced the design of Aksumite palaces. And Aksumite goods, particularly ivory, became highly fashionable status symbols among the Roman elite. However, this partnership was not without its points of friction. The two empires were also competitors. They vied for influence in the regions that bordered their empires, particularly in South Arabia, modern-day Yemen, and along the Nile Valley in Nubia, modern-day Sudan.
South Arabia was a crucial region, the source of the world's finest frankincense and myrrh, aromatic resins that were essential for religious ceremonies in both the pagan and later Christian Roman world. Both Aksum and Rome sought to control the kingdoms of this region, sometimes supporting different local factions in proxy wars. The greatest rival to both Aksum and Rome, however, was Sasanian Persia. The Persians were constantly seeking to disrupt the Red Sea trade route, which bypassed their territory and denied them valuable customs revenue. They encouraged piracy in the Indian Ocean and tried to form alliances with Arabian kingdoms to challenge Aksum's dominance in the region. This made Aksum a crucial strategic ally for Rome. By keeping the Red Sea safe and open for trade, Aksum was directly serving Rome's economic interests and undermining their common enemy, Persia. The Roman emperors understood this well. They saw Aksum not as a subject or a client state, but as a vital partner in their grand strategy against the Persians. This strategic alignment would become even more important in the 4th century, when a shared faith would bind the two empires together in a way that trade and politics never could. The story of this monumental shift revolves around one of Aksum's greatest kings, a ruler whose decisions would alter the course of history for his empire and for the world. His name was Ezana. Ezana ascended to the throne in the early 4th century, inheriting a powerful and prosperous empire. His early inscriptions show him as a traditional Aksumite king, a polytheist who gave thanks for his victories to gods like Astar, Beher, and Meter. He was a formidable military leader, and his inscriptions record successful campaigns against the Beja people to the north and a final, crushing victory over the once mighty kingdom of Kush centered at Meroe on the Nile. The destruction of Meroe was a landmark event. For centuries, Kush had been a major power in the Nile Valley, a rival to both Egypt and Aksum. Ezana's victory secured Aksum's western flank and gave them control over the trade routes leading into Central Africa. He commemorated this victory on a massive stone monument, the Ezana Stone, inscribed in 3 languages, Ge'ez, Sabaean, and Greek. This was a message to the entire world about the power of his empire. But Ezana's greatest legacy was not military. During his reign, a new religion was taking root in his kingdom, Christianity. The faith had likely arrived in Aksum through merchants and travelers from the Roman Empire. According to tradition, the king's own conversion was brought about by a Syrian Christian named Frumentius, who had been shipwrecked on the Red Sea coast and brought to the Aksumite court. Frumentius gained the trust of the royal family and became a tutor to the young prince Ezana. When Ezana became king, he made a decision that would change Aksum forever. He declared Christianity the official state religion of his empire. This was a radical move. It happened around 330 CE, roughly contemporary with Constantine the Great's own embrace of Christianity in the Roman Empire. Ezana's later coins reflect this change dramatically. The old pagan symbols of the crescent and disk were replaced with the Christian cross. He was now not just a king, but a Christian king, a defender of the faith. This conversion had profound geopolitical consequences. It transformed the strategic partnership between Aksum and Rome into a sacred alliance. They were now the world's two great Christian empires, united by a common faith against the Zoroastrian Persia and the various pagan kingdoms that surrounded them. This alliance reached its zenith in the 6th century under another great Aksumite king, Caleb. At the behest of the Byzantine Roman Emperor Justin I, Caleb launched a massive military expedition across the Red Sea to South Arabia. The reason was the persecution of the Christian community there by a local Jewish king who was backed by the Persians. Caleb's invasion was a success. He defeated the usurper, installed a Christian ruler, and brought South Arabia firmly into the Aksumite sphere of influence. For a brief period, the Aksumite Empire reached its greatest territorial extent, a true superpower whose domain stretched across both Africa and Asia. This was the high-water mark of the Aksum-Rome alliance. They were two Christian titans working in concert to shape the world according to their shared interests and beliefs. But this moment of triumph also contained the seeds of future decline. The massive resources required for the Arabian campaign may have overstretched the empire, and the shifting sands of global politics and religion were about to create new challenges that neither empire could have foreseen. A new power was rising in the heart of Arabia, a power that would not only shatter the old alliances, but would also redraw the map of the world, leaving the Christian kingdom of Aksum dangerously and fatefully isolated. The Golden Age was glorious, but it could not last forever. The world was changing, and the whispers of a long, slow decline were beginning to be heard in the highland capital of Aksum. The conversion of the Aksumite Empire to Christianity under King Ezana in the 4th century was not merely a change of personal belief for the monarch. It was a fundamental reshaping of the nation's identity, culture, and destiny.
It was a revolution from the top down, a deliberate act of statecraft that aligned Aksum with the dominant religious and cultural currents of the Roman world and set it apart from its pagan and Jewish neighbors. To understand the magnitude of this change, we must first understand the religion it replaced. Pre-Christian Aksumite religion was a complex polytheistic system. The chief god was Astar, a male deity associated with the sky, equivalent to the planet Venus. Other important deities included the sea god Beher and the earth god Meter. This pantheon shared common roots with other Semitic religions, particularly those of South Arabia, but it had its own unique Aksumite character. Religious life revolved around rituals, sacrifices, including, according to some inscriptions, animal sacrifices to thank the gods for victory in battle, and the veneration of the king, who was seen as a semi-divine figure, a son of the invincible god Mahrem. This was the faith that had underpinned Aksumite society for centuries. It was the faith that had blessed the conquests of its warrior kings, and the faith in whose name the great stelae were likely erected. To abandon it was to break with the traditions of the ancestors, a decision fraught with risk. So why did Ezana do it? The traditional story of his tutelage under the Syrian Christian Frumentius provides a personal motive, but the geopolitical advantages were undeniable. By adopting Christianity, Ezana was forging an unbreakable ideological bond with the Roman Empire under Constantine. This was a masterstroke of diplomacy. It elevated Aksum from a mere trading partner to a brother in faith, a co-defender of Christendom. This shared religious identity provided a powerful new basis for their alliance against Persia and gave Aksum immense prestige throughout the Christian world. The process of Christianization was gradual. It began with the royal court and the urban elite and slowly spread outwards into the countryside over many generations. The key figure in this process after Ezana was Frumentius himself. He traveled to Alexandria, the center of Christianity in the Eastern Mediterranean, and was consecrated as the first bishop of Aksum by the great patriarch Athanasius. This act established a crucial link between the new Aksumite church and the ancient Coptic Church of Egypt, a relationship that would endure for over 1,600 years. This connection shaped the unique character of Ethiopian Christianity. It was from Egypt that Aksum received its theological doctrines, its liturgical practices, and its monastic traditions. In the late 5th and early 6th centuries, a group of missionaries known as the 9 Cents arrived in Aksum, likely fleeing persecution in the Byzantine Empire after the Council of Chalcedon.
These monks played a pivotal role in spreading Christianity throughout the highlands. They founded monasteries that became centers of learning and evangelization, and they began the monumental task of translating the Bible and other religious texts from Greek into Ge'ez, the local Semitic language of Aksum. This act of translation was profoundly important. It not only made the Christian scriptures accessible to the Aksumite people in their own tongue, but it also transformed Ge'ez into a sophisticated literary and liturgical language. The development of this written literature, centered on the church, was one of Aksum's most enduring legacies, preserving the language and culture of the empire long after its political collapse. The new faith also inspired a new form of architecture. While the Aksumites did not abandon their skills in stonework, their focus shifted from building monumental tombs to constructing churches. Early Aksumite churches were likely based on the basilica plan common throughout the Roman world, but over time, they developed their own unique architectural styles, traditions that would culminate centuries later in the famous rock-hewn churches of Lalibela. One of the most significant and mysterious aspects of Aksumite Christianity is its connection to ancient Judaism and the Ark of the Covenant. Ethiopian tradition, recorded in the medieval epic known as the Kebra Nagast, or the Glory of Kings, claims that the Queen of Sheba, whom they identify as an Aksumite queen named Makeda, visited King Solomon in Jerusalem and bore him a son, Menelik. When Menelik grew up, he traveled to visit his father and, on his return journey, brought the Ark of the Covenant containing the tablets of the Ten Commandments with him to Aksum. According to the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, the Ark remains there to this day, housed in a special chapel next to the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, guarded by a single virgin monk who is forbidden to ever leave the chapel grounds. No one else is ever allowed to see it. To historians and archaeologists, this story is a foundational myth, not a verifiable fact. There is no historical evidence of the Ark ever being in Ethiopia, and the story only appears in written form in the 13th century, long after the fall of the Aksumite Empire. However, the belief itself is profoundly important. It speaks to a deep-seated element of Aksumite and later Ethiopian identity, which sees their nation as a new Jerusalem, a chosen people with a direct link to the biblical history of ancient Israel. This belief may reflect the historical presence of a significant Jewish population in the region known as the Beta Israel, or it may have been a way for the Christian kingdom to claim a legitimacy that predated even the coming of Christ. Whatever its origins, the story of the Ark became a cornerstone of the Ethiopian national identity, linking the monarchy to the line of Solomon and giving the church an unparalleled claim to sacred authority. The conversion to Christianity, therefore, did more than just change how the Aksumites worshipped. It reshaped their politics, their language, their culture, and their very conception of themselves and their place in the world. It tied them to the Coptic tradition of Egypt, forged a holy alliance with Byzantium, and created a unique national epic centered on the Ark of the Covenant. For a time, this new Christian identity was a source of immense strength and prestige. But as the world around them changed, as new empires and new faiths rose to prominence, this very identity would contribute to Aksum's growing isolation. The faith that had connected them to the wider world would eventually become the defining feature of a kingdom left alone, a Christian island in a sea of change. No empire lasts forever. For centuries, Aksum had stood as a titan of the ancient world, a testament to African ingenuity and power. But from the 7th century onwards, this mighty empire began a long, slow, and mysterious decline. There was no single, cataclysmic event that brought Aksum to its knees. Instead, it was a convergence of multiple crises, environmental, economic, and political, that gradually eroded the foundations of its power, leading to its eventual fragmentation and collapse. One of the most critical factors was climate change. The period of Aksum's golden age had coincided with a warm, wet period in East Africa known as the Roman Warm Period. This favorable climate supported the intensive agriculture needed to feed the empire's large population and produce a surplus for trade. However, starting around the 6th and 7th centuries, the climate began to shift. The region entered a drier, more arid phase. Rainfall became less reliable, leading to prolonged droughts. Archaeological and paleoclimatological evidence gathered from lakebed sediments and ancient pollen confirms this dramatic environmental shift. For a kingdom utterly dependent on agriculture, this was a disaster. Crop failures would have led to famine, social unrest, and a decline in population. The tax base of the state would have shrunk, making it harder for the kings to fund their armies, maintain infrastructure, and project their power. Compounding this environmental crisis was a self-inflicted one: ecological degradation. Centuries of intensive farming, deforestation for fuel and construction, and overgrazing by livestock took a heavy toll on the fragile highland environment. Soil erosion became a major problem as the fertile topsoil was washed away from the hillsides, reducing the productivity of the land even further. The very success of the empire had sown the seeds of its own environmental collapse. As Aksum was weakening from within, it faced a monumental challenge from without. The rise of Islam in the 7th century and the subsequent Arab conquests fundamentally reordered the world. The Rashidun and Umayyad caliphates expanded with breathtaking speed, conquering Persia, the Levant, Egypt, and North Africa. The Mediterranean, once a Roman lake, was now contested. More importantly for Aksum, the Red Sea, the source of its wealth and its connection to the outside world, was transformed. The early relationship between Aksum and the first Muslims was actually positive. The Aksumite king had famously granted asylum to a group of Muhammad's followers fleeing persecution in Mecca, an event known as the First Hijrah. This act of kindness earned Aksum a special status, and for a time, the new Islamic powers left the Christian kingdom in peace. But the economic reality was inescapable. With the Islamic caliphates now controlling the major ports of Egypt, the Levant, and Arabia, the old trade routes that had enriched Aksum were disrupted and reoriented. The flow of commerce shifted north, towards Baghdad and Damascus. The Red Sea became a secondary route, and Aksum's once bustling port of Adulis began to decline. The empire's main source of revenue, the taxes and tariffs on international trade, dried up. This economic isolation was a devastating blow. The minting of gold coins, the ultimate symbol of Aksum's international standing, ceased in the early 7th century. Later coins were struck only in silver and bronze, and their quality steadily declined. This debasement of the currency is a classic sign of an empire in severe economic distress. Faced with a failing agricultural base and collapsing international trade, the Aksumite state began to crumble. Power shifted away from the central authority of the king in the capital. Local lords and regional governors became more autonomous, and the political unity of the empire began to fracture. The capital itself seems to have been moved from Aksum to a new, more defensible location further south, though the exact location is still debated by historians. This was a retreat, a pulling inward, a sign that the empire was no longer confident in its ability to control its old heartland. It is in this period of chaos and decline that we hear the story of a mysterious and terrible figure, the warrior Queen Gudit or Yodit. According to Ethiopian tradition, Gudit was a queen, possibly of a southern pagan or Jewish kingdom, who rose up against the weakened Aksumite state in the 10th century. She is said to have led a devastating invasion, sacking the city of Aksum, burning its churches and monasteries, and hunting down the last members of the royal family. She is portrayed in the chronicles as a monstrous figure, a destroyer of Christian civilization. The historical reality of Gudit is difficult to ascertain. She may have been a real historical figure, the leader of a rebellion by a subjugated people who had long resented Aksumite rule. Or her story may be a composite, a legendary embodiment of the period of chaos and destruction that marked the final end of the Aksumite era. Whether by the hand of a warrior queen or simply through the inexorable pressures of climate change, economic isolation, and internal decay, the Lost Empire of Aksum finally collapsed. Its great cities were abandoned and fell into ruin. Its political authority vanished. The remaining Christian kingdom retreated into the defensive fortress of the Ethiopian highlands, cut off from the rest of the Christian world. For centuries, it would be a lost kingdom, its glorious past forgotten by the outside world. The silence that descended over the ruins of Aksum was profound. But the legacy of this great African superpower did not die. It was preserved in the traditions of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, in the Ge'ez language of its scriptures, and in the bloodlines of the dynasties that would later claim descent from the legendary kings of Aksum. The empire was gone, but its ghost would continue to haunt the Ethiopian highlands, a powerful memory of a time when an African kingdom stood among the greatest powers on earth. The story of what happened next, of how this legacy was reborn, and how the modern world rediscovered the secrets of this lost civilization, is the final chapter in the epic of Aksum. The political entity of the Aksumite Empire may have dissolved by the late 10th century, but its soul endured. The legacy of Aksum is not merely one of ruins and artifacts. It is a living heritage that has profoundly shaped the culture, religion, and identity of Ethiopia and Eritrea to this day. Perhaps the most significant and enduring legacy of Aksum is the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. The church, born from King Ezana's conversion, became the vessel that carried Aksumite civilization through the dark ages of its collapse. In its isolated monasteries, monks painstakingly copied the ancient scriptures written in Ge'ez, preserving not just the Christian faith, but the language of the empire itself.
Ge'ez ceased to be a spoken language, but it remained the sacred and literary tongue of the church, a direct linguistic link to the glories of the past. The church also preserved the unique traditions that had been forged in Aksum, including the deep reverence for the Ark of the Covenant and the belief in their nation's special place in sacred history. This powerful Christian identity became the glue that held the highland peoples together after the state fell apart. It provided a sense of unity and purpose that allowed a new dynasty, the Zagwe, to rise in the 12th century and, later, the Solomonic dynasty in the 13th, which explicitly claimed direct descent from the last kings of Aksum and, through them, from Menelik and King Solomon. This claim, enshrined in the Kebra Nagast, was a brilliant piece of political legitimization. It re-established a connection to the golden age of Aksum, casting the new rulers as the rightful heirs to Africa's forgotten superpower. This Solomonic line, with its roots deep in the Aksumite past, would rule Ethiopia for over 700 years, until the fall of Emperor Haile Selassie in 1974. The cultural legacy of Aksum is also visible in stone. The incredible skill in masonry and rock carving, first demonstrated in the Great Stele, did not disappear. It was transformed. The Zagwe kings, seeking to create a New Jerusalem in the heart of Ethiopia, channeled this ancient expertise into carving entire churches out of the living bedrock at Lalibela. These magnificent structures, which are still active places of worship today, are the direct architectural descendants of the Aksumite tradition. But despite all that has been preserved, the Lost Empire of Aksum still guards many secrets. It remains a fertile ground for archaeologists and historians, a place of profound and tantalizing unsolved mysteries. The first great mystery lies beneath the stelae themselves. While these monoliths are understood to be funerary markers, the main royal necropolis of Aksum has never been definitively found. Many of the grandest tombs, including the massive mausoleum and the tomb of the false door, were plundered in antiquity. Where are the unlooted tombs of the great Aksumite kings like Ezana and Caleb? Do they lie hidden beneath the modern town, waiting to be discovered? Finding an intact royal tomb would be the archaeological discovery of a lifetime, an African Valley of the Kings that could revolutionize our understanding of Aksumite wealth, culture, and religious beliefs. Another mystery is the true extent of Aksumite rule. Inscriptions boast of campaigns deep into Nubia and across the sea into Arabia, but the exact borders of the empire and the nature of its control over these distant territories are poorly understood. How far south did their influence really extend into the African interior? What was the full extent of their Red Sea naval power? Unexplained archaeological discoveries, like Aksumite pottery found far from the empire's core, offer clues but also raise more questions. Then there is the enigma of the empire's final days. While we have a broad understanding of the factors that led to its decline, climate change, economic isolation, and internal strife, the specific events of the 9th and 10th centuries are shrouded in legend. Who was the historical Queen Gudit? Was she the primary cause of the final collapse or just a symptom of it? The lack of written records from this chaotic period means we may never know the full story, leaving one of the most dramatic chapters in African history in the realm of myth. And of course, there is the greatest mystery of all, the Ark of the Covenant. For the faithful of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, it is not a mystery but a sacred reality. For the rest of the world, it remains an object of intense speculation and fascination. While historical and archaeological evidence for its presence in Aksum is non-existent, the power of the belief itself is undeniable. It has shaped a nation's identity and continues to draw a veil of profound sanctity and secrecy over the holy city of Aksum. The rediscovery of Aksum by the outside world began in earnest in the 19th and 20th centuries, as European explorers and then archaeologists began to uncover the ruins and piece together the story of this forgotten empire. The work continues today, with each new excavation revealing more about this remarkable civilization. The story of the Lost Empire of Aksum is a powerful reminder that our popular understanding of ancient history is often incomplete, centered on the familiar stories of Greece and Rome. Aksum proves that great civilizations, complex societies, and powerful empires flourished all over the world. It was a uniquely African superpower, an indigenous civilization that rose to become a dominant player on the global stage, shaping the course of history in Africa, Arabia, and beyond. Its rise to glory, its spectacular achievements in engineering, trade, and culture, and its long, mysterious decline offer a timeless and universal story of ambition, faith, and the inevitable fragility of all human empires. The silent stelae still stand guard over its secrets, challenging us to remember and to continue the search for answers in the heart of the Ethiopian highlands.